Mangroves, the root of ecosystem biodiversity within the Caroni swamp. The Caroni swamp is a naturally protected area which is located within central Trinidad and is an integral component of the Caroni watershed. The Caroni swamp is the second largest wetland in Trinidad after the river swamp and consists of mangroves and herbaceous marsh interrupted by numerous lagoons and channels.
Now, here is the north-south channel. This and 8 others are drainage system to drain the interior of the island. This swamp is in the middle of the island on the western side, and the island is like that. So when the rain falls, most of the water passes through and it goes through here and it goes in the Gulf of Paria.
Mangroves are terrestrial flowering plants that have reinvaded the fringes of the sea. The mangrove plants comprise of 3 types, black, red, and white mangroves, which all together form the complex mangrove forest ecosystem of the Caroni swamp.
The white and the red have filters in the roots. They filter the salt and take in the fresh. While the black mangrove, this one, take in the salt water, filter the salt, and send it back out on the leaves.
Mangroves supply a rich source of biodiversity to Trinidad, comprising of ecosystem-based as well as species-based biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of living organisms at all levels of organization. Mangroves provide 4 habitats for organisms, which include the arboreal habitat, the root habitat, the aquatic habitat, and the sediment habitat, all of which are inhabited by a range of species of organisms, which all interact through complex ecological processes, thereby creating a unique ecosystem with high productivity levels and a correspondingly high level of species biodiversity.
What are some of the main functions that the mangrove ecosystem of the Caroni swamp provide to Trinidad and Tobago?
Mangrove ecosystems provide a wealth of services which we can categorize as goods, services and attributes. Goods meaning those things that we can actually pay money for, like food and seafood and shellfish and so on. And the services have to actually do with what we call the regulating services.
Can you highlight the levels of biodiversity offered within mangroves in terms of species richness, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity?
Well, there are different levels of the ecosystem, as it were. So again, we can talk broadly about the aquatic environment, what I call the root fauna, or the organisms associated with the roots as well, and what we call the arboreal fauna associated with the trees, and of course those will include the birds as well, or the aerial fauna. So it's 4 large groups of fauna in this case.
The prolific biodiversity offered by the mangrove forest ecosystem can be interpreted in terms of the economic value of its biodiversity, which is divided into 2 components: its utilitarian value, which is based on human use value and includes all goods and services, such as food, medicine, water, pollution control, and its intrinsic value, which is based on non-human use values, such as contingent values and the mere value of its existence. The mangrove ecosystem of the Caroni swamp, like many other protected areas, are faced by a series of threats which jeopardizes the biodiversity levels and the lives of its inhabiting organisms. Some of these threats include hunting, habitat destruction, saltwater invasion, and rising levels of pollutants such as heavy metals, sewage discharge, solid waste, and suspended particles.
What do you think are the main threats faced by the mangrove ecosystem at the Caroni swamp?
There are a number of different threats that we can look at, starting from natural to anthropogenic. When you start looking at natural threats, you're looking at things like freshwater flooding. Mangroves are very intolerant of fresh water. They prefer brackish water, so whenever you have fresh water or extended periods of flooding, they will result in some sort of mortality of the trees themselves. And then, of course, you have to look at the associated flora and fauna. Most of the organisms that live in mangrove swamps are pretty much saline organisms or marine organisms, and are intolerant of fresh water also. So you will see a lot of mortalities, especially things like root communities. If you're looking at the red mangroves especially, the root communities, you would see a lot of dieback, especially things like oysters. And then of course we have the anthropogenic inputs of contaminants themselves. Some of these are oxygen demanding substances, so you can have high organic materials coming in, as happens sometimes, especially when they're releasing effluents from refining processes upstream. You get a lot of that entering the system, then you can get a lot of pesticides runoff from the rice fields getting into the swamp. And then of course you have the Salmon-Ochoy Highway, which is running close by. You have a lot of exhaust emissions, a lot of heavy metals runoff from there, and then you have the tourism activity inside of there. The boats that are running those trips are usually gasoline powered or gas powered boats, and you have a lot of emissions from those aromatic hydrocarbons, especially some additional hydrocarbons. You also have inputs from the Caroni River itself, which brings with it another set of contaminants from upstream industrial areas. We're looking at Twin City, O'Meara, and the Piaco area. A lot of the effluents from those areas come down into the Caroni River and eventually end up in the swamp itself. Then of course we have the added disadvantage of solid materials, garbage, plastics, bottles, you name it, solid waste. Right, so you have a lot of different types of contaminants coming in, which pose potential threats, not just to the trees, but also to the associated flora inside of there, and fauna.
In 2005, the Caroni Swamp was declared a Ramsar site, a wetland of international importance, as it is an essential habitat for numerous commercial species as well as rare and endangered species. Within the Ramsar site boundary, there are privately owned land, and development of these lands, especially along the Urea Highway, would further encroach on the wetland communities. The Forestry Division is the government agency with responsibility for managing the Caroni Swamp, and while they provide game wardens to patrol the swamp to discourage poaching, there is no comprehensive management plan for the conservation and restoration of this wetland.
Do you think there are enough measures in place to eliminate the threats faced by the ecosystem?
Currently, no. The only legislation that's protecting the swamp at present is its registration as a Ramsar site. It's not recognized as an environmentally sensitive area. The value of the swamp is not publicized, so there isn't enough protection for that area. We still have people going in and illegally hunting. You have people going in and extracting crabs and fish and shrimp with no regulations. You do have some policing from the Forestry Division, but it's not sufficient for the size of the swamp itself. They only patrol particular areas, not the entire swamp.
Do you think it's important to protect and conserve mangrove ecosystems in Trinidad?
Mangroves are probably one of the most valuable ecosystems that we have. They offer a number of protective services, things like shoreline stabilization. They act as a buffer zone for coastal flooding. They provide habitats. They provide recreational areas. They also provide food sources. So there is significant reason for protection. Because of the elevation of Trinidad, most of Trinidad and Tobago, we are actually prone to influences of freshwater, not freshwater, but tidal flooding. We're talking about anything that's that's related to sea level rise or extreme high tides. We are prone to flooding, and mangrove systems actually prevent that and provide a nice buffer. In addition, it also provides some shoreline stabilization and reduced flow of freshwater out of the terrestrial system, and acts as a buffer system for contaminants as well as sediments getting into your marine environment. which has additional impacts, especially if you have adjacent sensitive areas such as seagrass beds and coral reefs, as you happen to be.
In addition to high levels of biodiversity, mangroves provide a range of functions to the island, which include shoreline stabilization, protection against natural disasters, carbon sequestration, nurseries for aquatic juveniles, a habitat for endangered species, as well as ecotourism and a source of economic revenue for citizens and the economy. Therefore, the conservation and protection of the mangrove ecosystem is an integral part of our growth and our development.